You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry podcast.
Episode 38, The Monster of Moon Ridge. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green. Each week on Gene-ology, we examine one of Gene Roddenberry's early TV works from the years before he created Star Trek, and we try to shine a light on each one, seeking the kinds of morals, meanings, and messages that were such an important ingredient of his later work.
But this week, we get morals, meanings, messages, and a monster?
The suspense is unbearable.
Earl will be back with trivia in a moment, but first, here's how you can reach us. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook at missionlogpod. While you're at it, please leave us a review and rating at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, I think this is this week's trivia. Is it spooky? Is it monstrous even?
There is a monster amount of trivia here, I will warn you.
All right. Well, let's hear it, friend.
Okay, thank you. With the Monster of Moon Ridge, we're up to episode 24 of the second season of Have Gun Will Travel, just a month since Gene's last credit on the show. The episode aired on Saturday, February 28, 1959, up against Lawrence Welk's Dodge Dancing Party on ABC and the 90-minute Western series Cimarron City on NBC. By this point in its second season, Have Gun was routinely the number 3 show on American television, with Nielsen ratings of that period showing that, on average, most of the television sets in the United States were tuned in to Paladin's weekly adventures. It was followed on the CBS Saturday night schedule by the number 1 show in the country, Gunsmoke, which had a 2-year head start on Have Gun in terms of building audience loyalty, before which it was a beloved radio show. Now, Have Gun Will Travel did that in reverse. It found its way to radio after it became a hit on television. Premiering on the CBS radio network in November 1958, the weekly radio version of Have Gun Will Travel adapted many of the TV series episodes, starring John Dehner as Paladin. Audio adaptations of Gene's stories accounted for 4 of the first 10 episodes, with The Road to Wickenburg, Ella West, The Hanging Cross, and Helen of Abjanian considered strong enough to be part of the radio show's opening volley. Gene did not rewrite any of the radio versions of his stories. If he got paid for use of his stories at all, it was probably a very modest fee at best, while the radio show had its own regular writers adapting the TV material to a purely audio medium. The Monster of Moon Ridge was adapted for radio just a week after its television premiere, with the radio episode hitting listeners' ears on March 8, 1959. The radio series did eventually begin generating original stories, including a definitive series finale, which is something the television series did not give us at the end of its run. But let's talk about our guest stars on TV. Guest starring as Dan Bella, we have veteran actor Barney Phillips, who earlier in the 50s had a recurring role in the original Dragnet, and ironically in 1956 was in a TV movie called Have Camera Will Travel. He often wound up playing police officers and military officers, so when the Western rose to its dominance of the American airwaves, it was at least a little bit of a break from that typecasting. He's making the first of 4 appearances on Have Gun Will Travel here, each time as a different character. One of his best-remembered TV guest shots came a little bit later as the three-eyed bartender in the Twilight Zone episode, Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up? And in the late 60s, he began adding quite a bit of animation voice work to his resume. While he did land a few small movie roles in everything from The Sand Pebbles to I Was a Teenage Werewolf, Barney's face was most often seen on the small screen. We lost Barney in 1982. As Emily Bella, we have actress Natalie Norwick, who put in 7 separate guest shots on Have Gun, this being the only occasion on which she landed a part in one of Gene's scripts. She would go on to appear in the first season of the original Star Trek, however, as Martha Layton in The Conscience of the King. Shirley O'Hara plays Maria here, the first of 5 Have-Gun guest shots on her CV, with guest roles on The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Fugitive, My Three Sons, and Marcus Welby, M.D., she was a mainstay of the small screen, while still occasionally landing small movie roles in films, including a brief appearance in the original Rocky. And finally, if you're looking for other Star Trek connections here, Robert Fortier, as Clary in this episode, Maria's son, would go on to play Tomar in the original series' second season episode By Any Other Name. Act 1. At Paladin's home base at the Hotel Carlton, Hey-Boy's grandfather is here. Paladin joins the two of them in observing a brief Chinese ceremony. Once Hey-Boy's grandfather is out of earshot, Hey-Boy reminds Paladin of a newspaper clipping left on his desk concerning sightings of a monster in Moon Ridge, Colorado. Paladin was actually thinking that sorting out this monster might be his next gig, but Hey-Boy begs him not to go. But if he insists on going, Hey-Boy hands Paladin a small envelope telling him it is a dragon's tooth that will protect him. Paladin is amused, but also serious when he tells Hey-Boy, "Your new country has a much stronger potion for driving off evil, equal parts reason and daylight." But he also thanks Hey-Boy for the thought behind this gift. Cut to Moon Ridge, Colorado. Paladin has just arrived, commenting to Lunzi, the local sheriff, on the fact that the monster of Moon Ridge has everyone so scared that their doors and windows are locked or barred. And the town drunk is snooping around the sheriff's office, suspicious about a stranger riding into town at this hour. Lunzi explains that Dan Bella, a local farmer, has hired Paladin to figure out why his daughter Emily keeps claiming to see a monster. But his tipsy friend keeps spinning tales of a beast that's half man, half bear, leaving tracks that look like a human foot, if a human foot had claws. A beast that shrugs off bullets and snaps the necks of livestock. Paladin laughs out loud at this notion, and then gets straight to the point. Is there anything valuable about Bella's farmland that might make someone want to engineer this local legend to protect it? Lunzi admits that even the local Native American tribes won't get near the place. The sheriff tries to make it seem like he's a reasonable man who isn't bogged down by superstition, and yet Paladin notes that there's mistletoe hanging over the entrance to the sheriff's office. He doesn't think it's going to net anybody a kiss. Busted. Lunzi tells Paladin how to reach the Bella farm on the outskirts of town and calls it a night. Paladin wastes no time riding up to the Bella farm by moonlight and arriving to find Emily Bella sitting on the front porch in an almost trance-like state. She doesn't respond to his arrival at all. Paladin knocks on the door and is greeted by her father, Dan Bella, who is pleased to see him. Dan also has to practically lead Emily back into the house. She wasn't even supposed to be out here without telling him. He has to prompt her to give Paladin even the most basic of greetings. He then hands her her doll, and she heads off to bed. But Emily has to be in her 20s at the very least. Dan Bella unloads some backstory. Over a decade ago, disease swept through the valley, taking his wife from him and leaving Emily's mind in a permanently childlike state. Paladin observes that there are worse ways to live, but expresses some skepticism when Bella says the disease was the result of a spell cast by the monster of Moon Ridge. Bella says it once took Emily away for a week, and he saw footprints that were decidedly not human, and he's found the same prints outside Emily's bedroom window on a couple of occasions. Paladin says there's only one way to find the answers. He and the Bellas must travel to Moon Ridge, the actual ridge and not the town named for it, to look for clues about the monster. Act 2. Paladin, with Dan and Emily Bella, arrive at Moon Ridge on horseback by daylight. They immediately find two things: a tied bouquet of hand-picked flowers and a very non-human footprint that Paladin can't identify. When they hear a growl, Paladin and Dan Bella draw their guns and go to investigate, but while they're gone, something spooks the horses, presumably still carrying Emily, and now they're stuck on foot. Then they get separated. Paladin yells for Bella, shoots a single bullet into the air to give a clue to his location, but he can't find the man or his daughter. Night begins to fall, and the first order of business is always survival, so Paladin begins building a campfire. But as he's doing this, he hears cackling laughter, and for a second he thinks he sees... Was that a witch? Paladin stands his ground, shouting a warning to whoever is trying to spook him, right about the time that large furry claws grab him by the throat. You know what they say, some days the bear gets you. Paladin awakens on the ground in a cave, dusty but otherwise unharmed. There's a bear nearby with a chain around its neck. Okay, sometimes you get the bear. That's when Paladin notices that his own legs are manacled, so he's also stuck at the end of a chain, and he's been disarmed. Don't think the bear did that. Unable to reach anything that might help him escape or even light his cigar, Paladin starts monologuing to the bear, who seems unimpressed. As if the situation can't get any more unbearable, the witch reappears, cackling and all. She offers Paladin a light, but then extinguishes the torch that's providing any light at all. Paladin sees a young man that he's never seen before chained up instead of the bear. Then it's lights out again. When the torch reignites, the witch is gone, the mysterious boy is gone, the bear is back, and a pick that Paladin spotted earlier, out of reach, is now conveniently within reach. He goes to work on his manacles. Paladin exits the cave, but then lies in wait. The witch emerges from the cave, smiles, and heads off in another direction, unaware that Paladin is still there watching. He follows her. Act 3. Paladin continues trying to track the witch now that it's daylight again, but is instead greeted by the sight of Dan Bella leading the missing horses back. Dan even has Paladin's gun belt, gun and all. He says he still can't find Emily, but Paladin knows where she is and offers to lead her father to her. They arrive near the cave where Paladin was chained up earlier and find a cabin. And there's Emily feeding a bear with the young man Paladin saw earlier, and an older woman as well. Dan Bella recognizes the woman. It's Maria, Moonridge's former school teacher, until the same disease that left Emily in a permanently childlike state did the same to her son. The reason they live up here is the same reason the Bellas now live outside the city limits. The locals ran them out of town when both their children were stricken by the same debilitating illness. You know who else is at the cabin? The bear. The bear seems quite domesticated. Dan and Paladin announce their presence to Maria, who seems none too pleased to see them. It means her cover's been blown. She's the witch. Then she lightens up a bit and invites Paladin and Dan in for some stew. Over the meal, a plan begins to form. Bella says that the land Maria and her son are occupying is better than his land for farming, and it's further away from the town that drove them and their children both out of it. Maybe they should cooperate, let the witch and monster sightings die down into the stuff of local legend, and make a new home where they don't have to be afraid. Paladin finishes his stew and gets ready to ride out. Maria is concerned about what Paladin plans to tell the sheriff when he rides through Moon Ridge, Colorado, on his way back to California. Paladin turns and enigmatically says, "You know, ignorant and prejudiced people like to be deceived, and I think they deserve it when they are. Why confuse them with the truth? Their secret is safe with him, and so is the bear, especially since Paladin grabs some table leavings so he has a snack to offer up before he goes. As Paladin rides out, only the bear is watching." The end.
Thank you so much for that excellent synopsis, Earl. Well done, as always.
Thank you very much. It was a heavy load to bear, but bear it I did.
You did, in fact, bear it, my friend.
You know, I don't know what this ceremony is at the beginning of the show.
I don't either. I mean, forgive my ignorance. Is that a statue of Buddha? Or is it just an idol of some sort?
I'm not sure. I kind of went looking for some clues on the internet, and there was a very specific phrase that comes out of Paladin's mouth, which is that this is the trinity of, I think it was the heavens, the earth, and man, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And everything that I found in a search for that specific phrase led to Chinese astrology and feng shui.
Okay.
is it a real thing? Well, it's a real belief somewhere for someone. And I will leave that there. I just liked the fact that Paladin is respectfully observing something from outside his own culture. He's not demanding that they do things his way. We've been kind of doing this crazy zigzag just between the Gene episodes of Have Gun. And it seems like every other week we wind up with Paladin doing things that has us asking, Paladin, buddy, what you doing? And then this week, I just love the guy.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, I mean, he is the Paladin that I am tuning into this show to see. And so that's delightful. He's outside his comfort zone. He is still showing respect. He's respecting Hey Boy's elder. And so many people could learn from this show that aired in 1959.
I will say he is a bit dismissive of Hey Boy, when Hey Boy offers him the dragon scale, and he realizes that he's hurt Hey Boy's feelings by saying, oh, well, we have a stronger potion for that here. It's reason and daylight. Like they don't have reason, like we don't have reason and daylight in, is Hey Boy from China? I'm unclear on that.
Yeah, they're Chinese immigrants.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Which, that was a population in San Francisco of that era. Right. That is actually historically accurate. It's not an unreasonable reach for the fiction of the show to have Chinese working in San Francisco at that time. Right. Yeah. But as you pointed out, I do like that he backpedals.
Yes.
He's about to brush off that gift, for luck, and then he's like, no, thank you. I do appreciate it. I was almost expecting that to somehow make a comeback later in the episode. Like maybe it would be something that turned the situation around. Like, he can't reach that pick. Oh, wait, I've got this little sharp thing in my pocket that Hey Boy gave me.
Right.
But no, it's just a non sequitur. Either way, though, regardless of whether or not it resulted in a circular callback, this is vintage Gene.
Yes.
He is talking about not just tolerance for others, because tolerance as a word, I don't know, sometimes it implies that someone's, grunting, I'm okay with it through clenched teeth, in a way that, okay, obviously they're not. But Gene wanted people to go beyond tolerance and find acceptance and appreciation of the differences in other people. There's a famous quote from him on that subject, where specifically he was saying about delighting in the differences between people and not just reluctantly putting up with him. And so we've been kind of keeping tabs in the past on, oh wow, is Gene being woke for 59 here? In this one, oh yeah, he's not even hiding it. And that line about reason and daylight feels like it was written middle of last week, not the middle of last century.
Right.
Because this calls to mind the saying in the news industry that sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you shine a light on something and expose it, you're doing a lot more good than letting it fester in the dark and, do whatever dirty deeds it's going to do without anyone keeping an eye on it. And so I thought that quote was stunningly modern, quite frankly.
Yeah. It definitely is reflective too of Gene's personal beliefs as well. Like, Gene was an atheist at this point, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not an atheist, but I have a lot of friends that are, and so that would kind of be, for want of better terminology, like their own personal quote unquote statement of faith, like reason and daylight. So still, if we're working on recognizing these differences, like, and delighting in them and understanding, where people are coming from, I think that's really interesting that that's Gene's words in Paladin's mouth.
Absolutely. And that opening scene, I mean, that eats up a bit of time for a 26-minute show.
Yeah, it does.
And yet, it is there to arrive at that statement at the end about reason and daylight. And it just feels like, obviously, that's the whole point of the scene. But it's an interesting beginning for an episode of this show, which there have been some recent episodes that have started in the middle of something having already happened. Right. Paladin wakes up from being knocked out on the floor. And here we are starting from... We're not starting at 60 miles per hour. We're having to go from 0 to 60 gradually in this story. It's an interesting pace, given some of the recent shows that we've reviewed. Now, from a cinematography standpoint, I cracked up a bit in the sheriff's office. Paladin blows out that lamp, and the lighting in the room drops by maybe as much as 8%. And it's still way overlaid. It was like in Juliet, that cabin. Right. They're there at night. Again, we're dealing with the realities of the bright and dark responsiveness of 1950s televisions. And so the conventional wisdom then was you have to keep it somewhat bright.
Right.
Not long after this, we get an obvious bit of day for night shooting, which is where you shoot it in broad daylight, but you have some combination of filters over the camera lens, and you're intentionally stopping down the aperture size on the camera to limit the amount of light that the film is exposed to, and so that makes it look dark. But still, I think you could tell that was daylight. And so from a cinematography standpoint, and I noticed that this was not their usual director of photography, this episode is just a little bit all over the map, and yet you get to stuff later like in the cave with the witch and the torch going out and then reigniting. That was actually very effective.
Yeah, that was very good. That was very good. And I'll say, too, like, when we get the first appearance of the witch, I was genuinely taken aback because, yes, the title is The Monster of Moon Ridge. Wasn't expecting a witch. That was exciting and a little scary. Definitely, I have never watched a Western in which there was any kind of monster or felt like I was watching a Scooby-Doo episode. So I actually really enjoyed that. I'm wearing a horror movie t-shirt. It felt like that was appropriate today. I love horror movies.
That's an element that Have Gun Will Travel just does not traffic in.
Right. It was wildly unexpected. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's a real shock to the system. And also, we have some spooky music going on in Act 2 with the witch sighting.
Very, very effective.
Which, reminded me a little bit of some of the kind of atmospheric music cues from Star Trek episodes like The Cage or Cat's Paw. But it just more broadly reminded me of this era's wonderful standard playbook of film and TV scoring for spooky stuff. Yeah, and I'm a big soundtrack nerd. I don't even try to hide that. Same. And so this put a big grin on my face when I was watching it and listening to it. The music in this episode was not credited. A lot of the early season stuff comes from a production music library, or what most people refer to as a stock music library. And CBS either had developed that in-house or they licensed it from somewhere else. Later seasons of the show would have original music, and some of the composers included Van Cleve, Leith Stevens, Wilbur Hatch, who was later music director at not at Paramount, but at Desilu when Star Trek was being shot. And Wilbur Hatch also composed some of the stock music, the internal stock music library that was developed for use in Star Trek itself. But then you also had, young whippersnappers like Fred Steiner and Leonard Rosenman. And there were 2 episodes where you had this baby composer. This guy was very young. Jerry Goldsmith? I don't know what happened to him.
Never heard of him. I said with deep sarcasm, I love Jerry Goldsmith.
All right. I have one more really silly observation here. When Paladin says, no more man-bear tracks, am I the only person who immediately had a flashback to South Park and Man Bear Pig.
So I've never seen the Man Bear Pig episode, but one of my best friends from high school once for Halloween dressed up as Man Bear Pig.
Excellent.
She looked great. It was fantastic.
Yeah, the last thing I expected to think of while watching Have Gun Will Travel was, guys, I'm totally serial here.
If I may, Earl, I don't want to interrupt your Man Bear Pig, but I do want to circle back, just a little bit to our conversation about Paladin feeling, he said, I was feeling superior to my Chinese friend, but he came by his superstitions honestly. What's your excuse? And I think there it's interesting because he's, I said I felt like that was Gene's quote unquote statement of faith, but also it felt a little pretentious against those who don't believe in him or believe like he does. But at the same time, he's also calling out the sheriff who had just declared how, superstitious the Native American tribes are. They don't even go there. They're not informed or educated like us or whatever. And he's like, hey, you got some mistletoe up there and it ain't Christmas. So
yeah, nobody's kissing the sheriff today.
Yeah, no, and so the more I think about it, at first it struck me as like, well, that's a little pretentious, isn't it? But actually, he's not trying to be pretentious. He's just calling the sheriff on his crap. So
yeah, I think the implication of that is, Hey Boy did not have a choice in choosing his belief system. He was indoctrinated into that from childhood. And in a different culture where you really can't avoid that.
Right.
And so he does not hold that against Hey Boy. Whereas after the sheriff's kind of demeaning statements about the local Indian tribes, he's sitting there looking at Paladin like, you know how the Indians are. And I'm sitting here thinking, Paladin knows the Indian tribes all over the place quite well, thank you. We don't really get much of a cross-section of what this town is like. But going by what Dan says and what Maria says later in the episode, that they were both basically chased out of the heart of town, that kind of gives you the idea that, okay, they're pretty much all like the sheriff. The moment something spooks them, reason just flies out the window.
Yeah.
I could see where you might think that Gene's using Paladin as his personal mouthpiece here.
Right.
For what his belief system is. But he also challenges Paladin to keep being reasonable and not get spooked later in the episode. So I don't think he's letting anyone off the hook in this script. Okay, Ashley, we're at that part of the show where we start to perhaps look at the more silly, or not more silly, less silly, more serious parts of the script. Kind of the messages that we found here. What is the story really about? And the funny thing is, it's so upfront, I feel like we already hit on that in the previous segment. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of different examples of these people are different than me, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Although I did notice that the one little reservoir of fury that Paladin, and perhaps Gene as well, reserves for anyone is for those who have no tolerance for those who are different. In other words, the people of Moonridge who chased Maria and her son and Dan Bella and his daughter out of town.
And I don't understand how you could do that. I mean, I think even in the area in which I grew up, which prior to the internet, it took culture 3 to 5 business years to reach it. You have folks who, through circumstances of no accord, are now disabled in some way. Be that, a physical disability or mental disability or a handicap of some kind. Especially in something that was an epidemic. Like, I don't understand. Like, you guys know that these kids had this disease. They recovered from it in every way except this. This is not their fault. Why are these people acting in this way? You know, Mr. Bella says they were treated like animals. And so everybody who had kids that were like this got out of town.
True, but one need only rewind the clock a few years to COVID.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And think back to not only some of the ridiculous cures that were proposed, but some of the absolutely bat guano crazy origin stories that people had dreamed up for where this came from, and whether or not it was some sort of intentional attack. And so I could see an argument that things haven't changed that much.
Reasonable.
Now, the interesting thing that occurred to me after watching this episode a couple of times, at the end of the story, Paladin is about to exit stage left because he feels like he has accomplished what he came to do. And he's not even commanding a huge fee for it. He's only asking a couple $100 this week.
Yeah. I was like, wow, Paladin really, is he having a fire sale or something like that?
Well, I mean, maybe Dan Bella had a Groupon or something. I have no idea.
Maybe so. That's what it was.
And Dan's offering to pay him $500 as originally discussed.
Mm-hmm.
But Paladin's like, nah, $200 will do. I almost feel like Paladin is getting out of this a story that he can charm people with over dinner for years. Like, you are absolutely not going to believe this. But one time I went to this place in Colorado, and so, that sort of thing, I guess has some value as a meal ticket, hence the unhealable deep cut discounts, as the Firesign Theater used to put it. But the other question, the real question that occurred to me is, Dan is sitting here pitching to Maria, the lady who has been posing as the witch of Moon Ridge, kind of joining forces. I don't really know if this extends to a blended household. I did actually like the fact this is really a discussion of mutual goals and needs, and there's not really a romantic sheen on any of it.
Yeah, it felt more like a business proposition than it did a marriage proposal. You have better land for farming, and I like your cooking. So, I mean, it sounds like, is he going to move his household up there and, just be her neighbor? Or are they going to share quarters? Like, what's the deal here? But it felt much more like a business proposition than a marriage proposal.
Yeah, it felt very transactional, and that brought me to this question. Who needs who more? Because it seems that Dan has a lot to gain by abandoning or selling the land that he's on, which is hard to farm. He's already said that himself. And moving himself and Emily up to Maria's place. There's better land for him to work up there. And, as he puts it, the gun on his hip will keep prying eyes away. And, of course, I'm sure the legend of the witch and the monster will probably do some of the legwork for him as far as enforcing that isolation that he seems to crave here. The kids, and these are both kids in their mid-20s, but they're, very childlike mentally, they'll be happy not having to sneak around to spend time together.
Yeah, because they seem to enjoy each other's company, they're friends. Also, maybe this is something I should have mentioned in observations. How in the world did this woman tame a bear? Like, I don't think she needs the gun. Like, she's like, I have tamed this bear. It is my pet, and it will take you out.
Yeah, well, exactly. And when he's off duty, the bear is totes adorbs. There's nothing
Totes adorbs.
Not to love about that bear. Does she really need Dan Bella up there with the gun on his hip for any of this? What is she getting out of it?
Maybe a little more, like, crop versatility or somebody else handling the gardening and stuff. But,
it could be.
It sounds like Dan Bella is certainly getting the better end of the deal.
Yeah, it seemed to me like Miss Maria was holding her own just fine up there. Now, yes, she was having to put a lot of effort into it, because occasionally someone, whether it was the little drunk guy that we met when Paladin first rode into town, someone gets brave enough to wander up there and try to check it out. You know, boy, I've got to put on the costume, got to poke the bear and make him mad. Here we go again. So it could be that what she really gets out of it is she can drop the witch shtick. Which, by the way, I dare everyone listening to try to say witch shtick 5 times fast. She can just kick back and do stuff around the house, do some gardening. Maybe Dan does the heavy lifting and the real manual labor from that point on. You know, if her place needs fixing up, Dan can do that. But otherwise, it just seems like it just really raised the question, okay, Dan's really pitching a hard deal here. Like, you know, let's do this. Let's do this now. Does she get a say in this? How much independence is she surrendering? And does that bother her at all? Or maybe, you know, considering all the effort that she has had to put into maintaining the legend of the Monster of Moon Ridge, maybe she's just like, okay, finally, I don't have to keep doing this. It would have been nice to just see something in the script to acknowledge, okay, this is what she gets out of this proposed transaction that makes us believe that it is a thing that will happen, and it's not just some guy moving in on her territory.
Well, and I have to wonder, you know, if this is more of a business proposition, is he going to, like, build his own house, like, next door or whatever? Are there other folks who, like them, have children who were affected by this disease? Could this become a sort of commune for those with these kids who are permanently kids?
A commune or a whole other city?
Right. Seriously. Like, it could become its own thing. And, you know, we can keep the legend to keep, like, some of the spooked folks out. But, yeah, you know, it feels like they're aiming for a type of utopia almost.
Boy, that's interesting that Gene would be proposing anything like that in any of his scripts.
He never did that. He never did that before, ever.
Yeah, I mean, next thing you know, they're going to do away with money.
What? I think one other thing that I would like to point out is there are a couple of literary references in here. There was, you know, the one to Macbeth, Enter the First Witch, and then he recites, like, the things that go in a witch's stew. But I am blanking on the other piece of literature that he and Mr. Bella reference. I think it was like The Bride of Cyclops or something like that.
Yeah, and yeah. I think that was kind of interesting because it established, okay, we have 2 learned men here.
Yeah.
And so Paladin was maybe having a little bit of trouble sizing Dan up because, okay, there's obviously some education going on with this guy. Mm-hmm. I've just run that litmus test and he passed. Why is he still talking about a monster? Because I think the very next conversation is Dan attributes something to the monster, and Paladin's like, there's no monster, so what is this really?
And you know, whether or not he may actually think it's a monster, he does know there is something that's messing with his kid. And,
true.
And for want of better terminology, let's call it a monster.
Right. So maybe it's more metaphorical on Dan's part, and yet he's still talking about man-bear-pig tracks outside Emily's bedroom window. And right. So I think Dan's not sure where he falls on this, and Paladin is trying to suss that out before he really throws his lot in here.
Right.
But I think he's much more inclined to cooperate with Dan Bella than he is with the sheriff, who talks about what a reasonable man he is, and yet has his big wad of mistletoe nailed up above his door.
Right.
The only thing I can think of with the Macbeth stuff is it almost feels like something got cut there. Because no dialogue from the witch did not really have dialogue, did she? I mean, she just cackled.
No, she just...
Yeah, so it's not like she showed up and said double, double, toil and trouble.
Right.
It almost feels like maybe there was something filmed that got cut. Like maybe they wound up with too much and something had to hit the cutting room floor. And, you know, if they asked Gene at all, okay, what's it going to be? Are we cutting the Macbeth lines, or are we cutting this thing about daylight with Hey Boy at the beginning? And Gene would probably say, oh no, that thing about daylight, that's the whole point of the show. So cut out the Macbeth. And so we're left here with weird Macbeth references. Macbeth is not the only piece of literature or drama to feature witches. There were probably a lot fewer fictional references to witches in that time frame. But they were part of folklore. They were not, copyright and trademark Will Shakespeare. So the Macbeth thing is a little puzzling.
Yeah, and I think like the main thing it does is to illustrate how smart Maria is. You know, yes, she was the school teacher, but she was smart enough to play on these people's ignorance in order to protect her son. She was smart enough to somehow manage to tame a bear into being her protector, because she's by herself.
That's true.
I think it does nothing else but to verbally signal, yeah, this woman is super smart, and she can take care of herself. She doesn't actually need Mr. Bella to come up and help her. I mean, yeah, it's great to have community, and to have people who can be there to help. Again, this is a Gene Roddenberry thing. We work better together as a community. So, yeah, but she's perfectly capable on her own.
Yes, she is.
And Paladin points that out.
All right, Ashley, we are at the end of the show. I know it's been a lot to bear listening to my thoughts on this, but I think there are some very obvious messages here that Gene had for the audience in 1959. I think they are still messages we need to be listening to now.
Yeah.
I would almost bet you a large Supreme pizza that we are going to talk about the same line from the show here.
All right. Yeah. I think that's probably accurate. So let's find out.
I think there is no doubt what the message is, because it is, I mean, if you're looking for something bonk bonk on the head, this is it. But let's hear this line from the end of the show again anyway. Ignorant and prejudiced people like to be deceived, and I think they deserve it when they are. Why confuse them with the truth? Now, part of me feels like Paladin's being a bit judgy here, but I also think he may be onto something. The people of Moon Ridge, scared about the after effects of a disease on some innocent kids, drove those families out of town, like they were Frankenstein's monster or something. When Maria picked up on the fact that these people were maybe a step above being scared of their own shadows, can you really blame her for exploiting that fear if it buys her and her son a bit of safety and security?
I cannot.
As Paladin pointedly asks Dan Bella at little past the halfway point of the episode, has anyone physically been harmed? In other words, has the bear maimed anybody? No, the bear has basically served the same function it would have served if it was in a circus. It hasn't taken a bite out of anyone. So in Paladin's mind, the legend of the Monster of Moon Ridge is as harmless as whatever Hey Boy and his grandfather do to honor their belief system. Especially since, on the flip side of that, the people of Moon Ridge did do demonstrable harm to Maria and her son, and to Dan and Emily Bella. You fast forward to today, and yes, we do have a problem with people thinking that whatever they imagine to be reality whatever some rando on the internet or on the radio or on TV has told them is reality, that is reality. They're not running it through the usual reality checks. They're not seeing if it passes the smell test of reality. They feel that taking action against others and causing provable harm again is something that this belief of theirs grants them permission to do. This may sometimes be a religious belief that this preys upon. It may sometimes be a political leaning that it preys upon. But when this superstition, or as it is now, it's not so much superstition as disinformation.
Yeah.
When it is harming others, its validity and its motivation is open to question. And Paladin is ready to let the townsfolk of Moon Ridge keep believing in that monster. What he is not going to stand still for is those same townsfolk being the monsters.
Correct.
I was going to quote from Carl Sagan's The Demon-Haunted World here, and then I suddenly had an inkling that I better check my show notes from past episodes of Gene-ology, from some of the really early episodes. And then I realized, oh, I quoted that exact passage that I was thinking of from that exact book before. So let's keep it to a level that the folks in Moon Ridge can understand, and the folks in some parts of modern-day America can understand. Let's quote baseball great Yogi Berra, who once said, "There are some people who, if they don't already know, you can't tell them."
I think that's fair, and I believe I need to send you a large Supreme Pizza, Earl, because that was the exact line I had written down as well in my notes. Some folks prefer to remain ignorant because it's easier. They don't like to be challenged because it upsets their version of reality where they have to think about more complex things. And it's like, well, it's easier if this just doesn't fit my system, I just ignore it. And, you know, he's right. Ignorant people do like to remain in their ignorance. The trick is learning who's who. Because they, to quote Proverbs, fool remains right in his own eyes. Answer a fool to his folly, and he will remain right in his own eyes.
Yeah, and it's funny that there are even passages in the Bible to point this out.
Yeah.
Which is why I was saying some of this stuff starts out kind of attaching itself parasitically to religious beliefs or to political beliefs. It's not that people start out with horrible beliefs in those areas, but something attaches to them and just preys on fears and insecurities and says, but, oh, hey, you know, I'm down here. You can believe in me because believing in me lets you off the hook of having to change your lifestyle, your worldview, perhaps admit that you're wrong. You know, people don't like to do that. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
No one likes to admit they're wrong.
We also can't all be right at the same time, believing wildly different things, especially when the evidence flies in the face of some of the stuff that people are clinging to justify really despicable actions.
Yeah.
I don't think Gene is employing any subtext in this episode. He is just coming right out and saying it, and it's kind of like, as you pointed out off mic, this is the plot. This is virtually an episode of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, and I love that for it, honestly. I really enjoyed getting a little bit of spooky stuff in my Western that was definitely unanticipated on my part, so I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Yeah, and right before he rides out into the sunset, Paladin gives some Scooby snacks to the bear. I mean, this is 100% an episode of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that's something to recommend it. I really feel like this is... Gene's coming out swinging on this one. I mean, he's 180 proof, undistilled, in your face with it in this episode. He is not hiding any of it behind prettier words. He is having Paladin just come out and say what Gene thinks.
Yeah, definitely really appreciated that. as someone who has folks in her family who are special needs, and while older and in a lot of ways still mentally children, I've had a lot of empathy for Mr. Bella and for Maria and the lengths to which they have gone to protect their children from folks who are simply ignorant. And I think having had that experience myself, I don't understand how anyone could not be more understanding or more accepting of folks, especially those who had no choice in that situation. You know, it wasn't like they asked for their kids to be this way. I have a hard time having any empathy for anybody in the town.
Oh, exactly. I mean, they're just practicing the fine art of othering.
Yeah. And
whatever your problems are, it's their fault.
Right. And
them over there.
Well, and then Paladin says, you know, they have it best of all of us because they get to continue to be children.
I thought that was a very interesting line coming from Paladin.
Yeah, I that one surprised me. It took me back a couple of steps.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement. There is a surplus of really good stuff in this episode.
Yeah, agree. Also, a much better treatment of a woman character in this script than what we have seen previously, I would think. She isn't over here fawning over Paladin, like, because that's apparently impossible not to do. So I really appreciated that aspect, at least.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, if anything, she's really annoyed with him because at the point where she can't frighten him off, she's like, oh, this guy's a problem.
Yeah.
She really hasn't formulated a backup plan for that eventuality. And yet she even says later that she knew it would happen at some point.
Yeah. Somebody would eventually not choose to persist in their ignorance. Of what I've seen thus far with Have Gun Will Travel, I think this is probably my favorite episode that I've seen. I enjoyed the horror elements, you know, albeit light horror, but still I was like, oh, that was unexpected, and I really enjoyed that. I don't know why it was unexpected. The name of the episode is The Monster of Moon Ridge, and so I guess I was thinking, oh, it's like a wild boar or something like that. But no, it's a witch, and she has a man-bear pig.
Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. If you would like to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog for early access to shows and the Mission Log Discord. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takachi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.